My parents said, "We are done raising your mistake. Get out and never come back." Then they kicked me and my 5-year-old out in the middle of a snowstorm. 3 hours later, there was a knock at their door. They opened it and started screaming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a girl from Palo Alto's wealthiest family ended up homeless with a kindergartner in a blizzard that wasn't supposed to happen in Northern California. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and until 6 months ago, I had everything. A trust fund that could buy a small country, a penthouse in San Francisco, invitations to every gala from Napa to Carmel. My parents, Richard and Victoria Whitmore, owned half the tech startups in Silicon Valley, and the other half wanted their money. We were American royalty, the kind of family that appeared in Forbes and Vanity Fair, always smiling, always perfect, always lying. I met Jake at a charity auction in Sausalito. He was a marine biologist, teaching kids about ocean conservation, and he had this way of looking at the world like it still had magic in it. My parents hated him immediately, not because he was poor, though that didn't help. They hated him because he made me question everything they'd built their empire on. When I got pregnant, my mother actually laughed. She said, "You'll get rid of it, obviously. We have a doctor in Switzerland." When I refused, my father cut me off. Not partially, completely. Froze every account, pulled every string, made sure no one in their circle would hire me or help me. He said I was making a choice, so I had to live with the consequences. Jake and I got married at City Hall. No dress, no guests, just a judge who looked bored and a future that felt impossibly bright despite everything. We moved to a tiny apartment in Daly City, and Jake worked double shifts at the aquarium while I waitressed at a diner off Highway 1. When Emma was born, she had Jake's eyes and my stubborn chin, and I swear I'd never loved anything more in my entire life. We were happy in a way I'd never understood before, the kind of happy that doesn't come from things, but from Saturday morning pancakes and Emma's laugh and Jake's terrible jokes about sea otters. Then Jake died. A freak accident during a research dive off the Farallon Islands. Equipment failure. He was gone before they could get him back to the boat. I was 27 years old with a 4-year-old daughter and exactly $800 in our checking account. I didn't go to my parents. I had too much pride and too much anger. Instead, I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and kept Emma in a decent preschool because she deserved better than the mess I'd made of everything. For 5 years, I didn't speak to Richard or Victoria. They sent one flower arrangement when Jake died. No card, just white lilies that I threw in the dumpster behind our building. Then, last month, my mother called. Her voice was different, softer, almost human. She said they'd made mistakes, that life was too short for grudges, that they wanted to meet Emma, their only grandchild, before it was too late. My father had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said, and he wanted to make peace. I should have known better. I really should have known better. But I was tired, so tired of struggling and fighting and pretending everything was fine when Emma asked why we never went to Disneyland like her friends or why we couldn't afford the field trip to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So I said yes. I agreed to bring Emma to their estate in Atherton for Thanksgiving. My mother cried on the phone and said she couldn't wait to finally be a real grandmother. I actually believed her. The estate looked exactly the same. 20,000 square feet of marble and glass and money, sitting on 5 acres with views of the bay that made people weep. My mother opened the door in a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than our rent, and she looked at Emma like she was examining a painting she wasn't sure she wanted to buy. But she smiled and said, "Come in, darling, we have so much to catch up on." My father was in his study, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were the same cold calculation they'd always been. He shook my hand like I was a business associate and asked Emma if she liked horses. She nodded shyly, and he said they'd go riding tomorrow. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Dinner was catered by some celebrity chef from San Francisco, served by staff who looked through me like I was invisible. My mother asked polite questions about Emma's school and my work, and my father mostly stayed silent, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Then, after dessert, everything changed. My father cleared his throat and said, "Sarah, we need to discuss your future." I should have grabbed Emma and run right then. Instead, I said, "What do you mean?" He pulled out a folder, slid it across the table like he was closing a business deal, and said, "We're prepared to reinstate your trust fund and set up an education fund for Emma, $10 million, managed by our family attorney. All you have to do is sign." I opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, dense with clauses and subclauses, but I caught the important parts. In exchange for the money, I would agree to supervised visitation with Emma. My parents would have primary custody. I would admit in writing that I was an unfit mother due to financial instability and poor judgment. I would essentially sell my daughter for $10 million. I looked up at my mother, and she was smiling. Actually smiling. She said, "It's what's best for Emma, darling. You can't give her the life she deserves. We can. You'll still see her, of course. Weekends, maybe, once you've gotten your life together." I stood up so fast my chair fell over. I said, "You think I'd give you my daughter? Are you insane?" My father's expression didn't change. He said, "You're being emotional. Look at the numbers rationally. Emma deserves private school, travel, opportunities. What can you give her? A one-bedroom apartment and a mother who's too exhausted to read her bedtime stories?" Every word was designed to cut, and every word landed. My mother added, "We're offering you a way out, Sarah. Take the money, get your life together, be the mother she needs you to be. You can't do that while you're drowning in poverty." I grabbed Emma's hand and said, "We're leaving." My father stood then, and his voice was ice. "If you walk out that door, you'll regret it. I've already spoken to my attorneys. We have documentation of your financial instability, your inability to provide adequate housing, your work schedule that leaves Emma with babysitters more than with you. We'll file for emergency custody and we'll win. You know we will. Sign the papers, Sarah. Make this easy on everyone." I should have been smart. I should have recorded the conversation or called a lawyer or done something other than what I did. But I was so angry I couldn't think straight. I said, "Try it. Try to take her from me and see what happens." Then I picked up Emma, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. My mother's voice followed me down the hallway. "You always were stubborn, just like your father. It's going to destroy you." I didn't look back. The snow started 20 minutes into the drive back to San Francisco. Actual snow in the Bay Area in late November. The weather reports had mentioned a freak cold front moving down from Alaska, but nobody expected this. Within an hour, Highway 280 was a nightmare of black ice and abandoned cars. Emma was crying in the back seat because she was scared and confused, and I'd just dragged her out of a mansion full of warmth and promises. I tried to keep the car steady, but the roads were getting worse by the minute. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She said, "Sarah, where are you? The roads are terrible. Come back. We can discuss this tomorrow when everyone's calmer." I said, "So you can serve me with custody papers?" "No thanks." She sighed like I was being difficult about something trivial. "You're putting Emma in danger with this tantrum. Be reasonable. Come back to the house. Your father didn't mean what he said about the attorneys. We just want what's best for our granddaughter." I hung up on her. 5 minutes later, my car slid off the road into a ditch. We weren't hurt, but the car wouldn't start, and we were stuck on a stretch of highway with no other cars in sight, and the snow coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I called for a tow truck, but they said it would be at least 3 hours, maybe more. I had half a tank of gas, and Emma was already shivering, even with the heat on. I tried my mother again, hating myself for it, but desperate. She answered on the first ring. "Are you ready to be sensible?" I swallowed my pride and said, "Our car broke down. We need help." There was a pause, and then she said, "Where are you?" I told her our location. She said, "I'll send someone," and hung up. I waited with Emma in my lap. both of us wrapped in my jacket, watching the snow pile up on the windshield. An hour passed, then 2. No one came. I called my mother back and it went straight to voicemail. I called my father and the same thing happened. That's when I understood. They weren't coming. They'd left us out here in the storm on purpose, to prove a point, to show me how powerless I really was, to break me down until I had no choice but to sign their papers and hand over my daughter. I managed to flag down a police car that was making rounds checking on stranded motorists. The officer was kind, gave us a ride to a motel off the highway, and I paid for a room with the emergency credit card I'd been saving for actual emergencies. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from crying and fear. I sat on the edge of the bed and realized I had a choice to make. I could let them win, let them grind me down until I was nothing, or I could fight back. Not with lawyers I couldn't afford, or threats I couldn't back up, but with the one thing I had that they'd never understood, the truth. I spent that night making phone calls to old friends from before my parents cut me off, people who'd known the real Richard and Victoria Whitmore, to former employees of their companies who'd been forced out or silenced, to journalists who'd tried to write exposé pieces but couldn't get past the wall of money and lawyers my parents had built around themselves. I told them I was ready to talk, ready to tell everything, and in the morning I drove Emma to my friend Christine's house in San Jose, someone my parents didn't know existed, and asked her to watch Emma for a few days. Then I drove back to Atherton. It was 3 in the morning when I knocked on my parents' door. I'd used the gate code I still remembered from childhood, and I'd parked down the street so they wouldn't see me coming. My mother answered in a silk robe, her face a mask of cold fury. "What are you doing here? Where's Emma?" Behind her, my father appeared, looking satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl. I smiled at them both and said, "I came to give you what you wanted." My mother's expression shifted to something like triumph. She said, "You signed the papers?" I shook my head. "No, but I'm giving you a choice. Back off completely, drop any custody threats, and leave us alone forever. Or I go public with everything I know about how you really built your empire." My father actually laughed. He said, "You have nothing. No proof, no credibility. You're a broke waitress with a grudge. Who's going to believe you?" I pulled out my phone and held it up so they could see the screen. On it was a video file, date-stamped from 15 years ago. I said, "Remember when you had me work as your assistant that summer before college? I was 17, and I thought I was learning the family business. Turns out I was learning how you committed securities fraud, bribed city officials, and blackmailed your competitors. I kept copies of everything: emails, recorded phone calls, transaction records. I was going to give it all to the FBI when I turned 18, but then I met Jake, and I was so desperate to get away from you that I forgot about it. Found the files yesterday when I was looking for something else. Funny how things work out." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's expression went from smug to dangerous in half a second. He said, "You're bluffing." I forwarded the file to my email while they watched, and said, "Try me. I've already contacted 3 journalists and a federal prosecutor I went to college with. One word from me and this all goes public. You'll lose everything: your companies, your reputation, probably your freedom. Or you can walk away from Emma and me right now, forever, and I'll keep these files locked away. Your choice." My mother found her voice first. "You'd destroy your own family after everything we've given you?" I looked at her and felt nothing but pity. "You stopped being my family the day you told me to get rid of my baby. You stopped being human the day you left us in a snowstorm to prove how powerless I was. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just finally standing up to bullies who happen to share my DNA." My father moved toward me and I held up my phone. "Touch me and I send everything right now. I swear I will. I've got nothing left to lose and you've got everything. Do the math." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, my mother said, "What do you want?" I said, "I already told you. Leave us alone. No plasticity suits, no threats, no contact. You pretend Emma and I don't exist, and I'll pretend these files don't exist. Simple. My father's jaw clenched so hard I could hear his teeth grinding, but he nodded. Once, sharp and angry. I said, I need it in writing. Have your lawyer draft something by tomorrow, and if you ever come near my daughter again, I'll burn your entire world down and smile while it happens. We clear? I left before they could respond, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. I drove back to Christine's house, picked up Emma, and held her while she slept in the car. The legal documents arrived the next afternoon by courier. Everything I'd demanded, signed by both my parents and their attorney. I had a lawyer friend review them, and they were airtight. My parents had backed down completely. I'd won. But as I sat in our tiny apartment that night, Emma asleep in her room, I realized winning felt a lot like losing, because the truth was, I didn't have evidence of anything. That video file on my phone, it was Emma's kindergarten recital. The emails and transaction records I'd threatened them with, they didn't exist. I'd been bluffing the entire time. But my parents didn't know that, and they'd believed me because deep down, they knew exactly what kind of people they were. They knew they'd committed crimes, ruined lives, destroyed anyone who got in their way. So when their own daughter showed up with threats and files and federal prosecutors, they didn't question it. They just folded. Because guilty people always believe they're about to be caught. I'd gambled everything on that one psychological truth, and somehow, impossibly, I'd won. Emma was safe, we were free, and my parents would spend the rest of their lives wondering if I really had the evidence to destroy them, too afraid to test me, too proud to admit they'd been beaten by the daughter they'd thrown away. Sometimes the best revenge isn't violence or exposure. Sometimes it's just making powerful people afraid of you. But 3 weeks later, something happened that I didn't expect. My mother showed up at my apartment, alone, without security or lawyers, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She said she needed to tell me something about my father, something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. And what she told me made me realize that the real story was just beginning. My mother stood in the hallway of my apartment building looking like she'd aged 20 years in 3 weeks. Her designer clothes hung differently on her frame, and her hands trembled when she held them out like she was afraid I'd slam the door in her face. I should have. Instead, I let her in because Emma was at kindergarten and I had 90 minutes before pickup, and some terrible curiosity made me want to hear what could possibly make Victoria Whitmore look that broken. She sat on my second-hand couch like it might contaminate her, but her eyes were different than I'd ever seen them. Human, maybe, or just finally cracked open enough to let something real show through. She said, "Your father isn't sick. There's no cancer, no terminal diagnosis. That was part of the plan to get you back to the house." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my face neutral. Why would you lie about something like that? She looked down at her hands, and I watched her perfect manicure shake. Because Richard wanted custody of Emma, and he knew you'd never come back otherwise. He's been planning it for months, since he found out where you were living and started having you followed. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. I said, "Why? Why does he want Emma so badly? He never cared about me. Why would he care about his granddaughter?" My mother's laugh was bitter and sharp. "He doesn't care about her. He cares about what she represents. Control, legacy, winning." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were glassy with tears that I'd never seen her shed before. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about your father, about our whole marriage, about everything you think you understand about our family." I wanted to tell her I didn't care, that she'd lost the right to explain anything when she left Emma and me in that storm, but I stayed quiet because something in her voice told me this wasn't manipulation, this was confession. She said, "I was 18 when I met Richard, fresh out of boarding school, daughter of a real estate developer in Connecticut who'd lost everything in a bad deal. Your grandfather drank himself to death that same year and left my mother with nothing but debt. Richard was 32, already building his first tech company, already powerful. He saw me at a fundraiser and decided he wanted me. Not loved me, wanted me, like I was a car or a house or another acquisition. She twisted her wedding ring around her finger, and I noticed how loose it was, like she'd lost weight. He told me he'd take care of my mother's debts and set her up for life if I married him, so I did. I was 19 at our wedding, and I didn't love him, but I told myself love wasn't important. Security was. Stability was. I felt something shift in my understanding, but I didn't interrupt. She continued, "For 35 years, I've been his perfect accessory, the beautiful wife who hosts parties and sits on charity boards and never asks questions about where the money comes from or what he does to get it. I gave him you because he wanted an heir, and when you turned out to be a girl, he was disappointed, but decided you could still be useful. He'd marry you off to some tech mogul's son and expand his network. That was always the plan. Then you met Jake and ruined everything." She said his name like it hurt her, and I felt my chest tighten. "When you got pregnant, Richard saw it as the ultimate betrayal, not because you were unmarried or because Jake was poor, but because you'd chosen something for yourself instead of letting him choose for you. That's when I saw what he really was. He told me to convince you to terminate the pregnancy, or he'd make your life so miserable you'd do it anyway. I tried to talk him out of it, and he hit me. First time in our marriage, not the last." I stared at her, and something cold settled in my bones. "He hits you?" She touched her wrist unconsciously, and I saw a faint yellow bruise beneath her bracelet. "Only when I question him, only when I step out of line. He's very careful, never the face, never anywhere that shows. And I never told anyone because what would I say? I'm a billionaire's wife living in a mansion complaining about bruises? Who would believe me? Who would care?" I wanted to feel vindicated, to feel like this explained everything, but instead I just felt sick. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked at me with something that might have been desperation. "Because 3 days ago I overheard him on the phone with his attorney. He's not dropping the custody suit. The papers we sent you were fake, drawn up by a lawyer he paid to make you feel safe. He's been building a case this whole time. Financial records showing you can barely afford rent, testimony from Emma's school about how many times you've been late for pickup, photos of your apartment, your work schedule, everything. He's going to file for emergency custody next week, and he's going to win because he owns half the judges in this county." The room spun, and I gripped the armrest of my chair. "That's not possible. I have the signed documents. They're legally binding." She shook her head slowly. "They're worthless. The lawyer who drafted them isn't even licensed in California. Richard made sure of that. He wanted you to think you were safe, so you'd let your guard down. And it worked. You went back to your normal life, stopped looking over your shoulder, probably even felt relieved. Meanwhile, he's been preparing to take Emma, and there's nothing you can do to stop him." I felt rage and terror mixing together in my throat. "Why are you warning me? If he finds out you told me, he'll know you betrayed him." She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "I know. That's why I'm not going back. I filed for divorce yesterday. Real lawyers, not Richard's people. I took copies of financial documents that prove his fraud, his bribes, his offshore accounts, everything you threaten to have but don't actually possess. I'm giving it all to you." She pulled a USB drive from her purse and set it on the coffee table between us. I stared at it like it might explode. "Why would you do this? You've spent 35 years protecting him, being his perfect wife. Why turn on him now?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot and the normal people living normal lives. "Because I saw you with Emma that night at Thanksgiving, the way you held her when she was scared. The way you'd give up everything, even your pride, to keep her safe. I realized I never loved you like that. I never fought for you. I let Richard control you and mold you and eventually throw you away, and I just stood there because it was easier than standing up to him." She turned back to me, and tears were running down her perfectly made-up face. I can't get those years back. I can't undo what I did to you, but I can stop him from doing the same thing to Emma. I can give you the weapons you need to actually fight him. And maybe, if there's any justice in the universe, I can finally be the mother I should have been all along. I picked up the USB drive with shaking hands. What's your plan? Where will you go? She smiled again, and this time there was something fierce in it. I have accounts he doesn't know about, money I've been hiding for 10 years, just in case. A friend with a house in Portland who doesn't ask questions. I'll disappear and let my lawyers handle everything. Richard will be so busy fighting the divorce and the criminal investigations that he won't have time to come after Emma. And if these documents are as damning as I think they are, he'll be too busy trying to stay out of prison. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask her why it took 35 years and a granddaughter she barely knew to finally grow a spine. Instead, I said, "Thank you. I know that doesn't cover it, but thank you." She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the knob. "I was never good at being your mother, Sarah. I was too scared and too selfish and too broken by my own choices. But Emma deserves better than I gave you. Promise me you'll fight for her with everything you have. Promise me you won't let him win." I promised. She left, and I sat alone in my apartment holding a USB drive that contained either my salvation or another elaborate lie. I couldn't know which until I looked, so I pulled out my laptop, plugged in the drive, and started reading. What I found made my hands go numb. Bank statements showing millions in offshore accounts, emails detailing bribes to city council members for zoning changes, recorded phone calls where my father threatened competitors and arranged for smear campaigns against anyone who opposed him, text messages to his attorney discussing exactly how to fabricate evidence of my unfitness as a mother, photos of my mother's bruises, dated and documented over years. It was everything, every crime, every manipulation, every cruel calculation. My mother had been documenting it all. I called my lawyer friend immediately. Her name was Rachel Chen, and we'd met in a women's coding boot camp I'd briefly attended before money got too tight. She'd gone on to law school and now worked for a nonprofit that handled family law cases. When I told her what I had, she didn't believe me at first. Then I sent her 3 sample documents, and she called back within 10 minutes, voice shaking. "Sarah, this is enough to put your father away for 20 years. Securities fraud, bribery, witness tampering, conspiracy. And the domestic violence documentation could get your mother a restraining order and probably a significant divorce settlement. Where did you get this?" I told her everything, about the fake custody papers, about my mother's visit, about the real plan to take Emma. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, then said, "We need to move fast. If your father finds out your mother gave you this, he'll have time to destroy evidence or flee the country. We need to get this to the FBI and the SEC simultaneously, and we need to file for a restraining order protecting you and Emma today. Can you get to my office in an hour?" I picked up Emma early from school, told her we were going on an adventure, and drove to Rachel's office in downtown San Jose. For the next 6 hours, we sat in a conference room while Rachel and 2 of her colleagues copied files, drafted legal motions, and made calls to federal prosecutors. Emma played on an iPad in the corner, oblivious to the fact that her entire future was being decided around her. By 7 p.m., we had restraining orders filed, federal investigations opened, and enough legal protection to make sure my father couldn't get within 100 yards of us without facing arrest. Rachel drove us home and walked us to the door like a bodyguard. She said, "You need to be careful for the next few days. Your father is going to realize what happened, and men like him don't handle losing control very well. Keep your doors locked, stay in public places, don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. I've already talked to the police, and they'll do extra patrols past your building. You're going to be okay." I wanted to believe her, I really did. That night, I put Emma to bed and told her a story about a princess who saved herself without needing a prince or a fairy godmother. She fell asleep smiling, and I sat in the living room with every light on, jumping at every sound. My phone buzzed around midnight. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. My father's voice was ice and venom. "You think you've won. You think your mother's little betrayal means anything. I built empires, Sarah. I've destroyed people who had far more power than you. Whatever you've started, I'll finish. And when I do, you'll lose everything." I took a breath and channeled every ounce of strength I'd built over 5 years of surviving without him. "No, Richard, you'll lose everything. The FBI has your files. The SEC is freezing your accounts. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the country will know exactly what kind of monster you are. You spent your whole life building a legacy, and I'm going to watch it burn. And the best part? You did this to yourself. Every crime, every cruelty, every time you chose power over people. This is just consequences finally catching up." He was silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, "She was always weak, your mother. I should have divorced her years ago and found someone with actual spine." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "That weak woman just took you down. Think about that. The person you controlled and hurt and diminished for 35 years is the one who ended you. How does that feel, knowing you were beaten by someone you thought was worthless?" He hung up. I blocked the number. And then I sat in my apartment and cried for the first time since Jake died. Not because I was scared or sad, but because I was finally free. The next morning, the news broke. Federal investigators raiding Whitmore Technologies. Richard Whitmore arrested on multiple charges of fraud and bribery. Victoria Whitmore filing for divorce and cooperating with authorities. It was everywhere. CNN, the New York Times, every tech blog and business journal. My phone exploded with calls from reporters and old friends and people I hadn't spoken to in years. I turned it off and took Emma to the park. We spent the day on the swings and the slides and eating ice cream, even though it was barely 50 degrees outside. She asked me why I seemed happy, and I told her, sometimes good things happen to people who wait for them. She accepted that with the easy faith of 5-year-olds and went back to collecting acorns. I watched her play and realized that this was what winning actually looked like. Not revenge or justice or watching my father's empire crumble, though that was satisfying in its own way. Winning was my daughter being safe and happy and completely unaware of the war that had been fought over her. Winning was knowing that she'd grow up without the weight of the Whitmore name crushing her into something she wasn't. Winning was freedom. The trial took 8 months. My father hired the best lawyers money could buy, but money couldn't erase digital evidence or recorded confessions or my mother's testimony. He was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. He's 64 now. He'll probably die there. My mother got her divorce and a settlement that made her independently wealthy, though she gave most of it to charity and victims of my father's schemes. She moved to Portland like she planned and sends Emma birthday cards with carefully chosen books and small gifts. We talk sometimes, careful conversations where we're both trying to figure out how to be in each other's lives after everything. It's not perfect, but it's honest, and that's more than we ever had before. I used the reward money from the FBI for providing evidence in their case to go back to school. Turns out I'm pretty good at forensic accounting, all those years of watching my father's schemes finally useful for something good. I work for a nonprofit now, helping people trace hidden assets in divorce cases and fraud investigations. I make enough to move Emma and me to a 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, and we're saving up for a trip to the aquarium in Monterey. Emma wants to be a marine biologist like her dad, and I'm going to make sure she can be anything she wants. Sometimes I think about that night in the snowstorm, how close we came to losing everything, how my parents thought leaving us stranded would break me down enough to surrender.
Instead, it showed me exactly who they were and who I needed to become. I learned that power doesn't come from money or fear or control. It comes from knowing what you're willing to fight for and never backing down. My father spent his whole life believing he was untouchable, and that arrogance is what destroyed him. He underestimated the daughter he threw away and the wife he abused, and that mistake cost him everything. 3 years after his conviction, I got a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was short. No apology, no admission of guilt, just a single question. Was it worth it? I wrote back with an even shorter answer. Yes. Because it was worth it. Every scary moment, every uncertain step, every time I had to be braver than I felt. Emma is 7 now, and she's thriving. She has friends and hobbies and a mother who would burn the world down before letting anyone hurt her. She doesn't remember my parents, or the mansion, or any of it. Her childhood is normal and happy and hers, not shaped by legacy or expectation or the crushing weight of other people's ambitions. My mother came to visit last month.
She's different now, softer and more real. She brought Emma a book about ocean conservation, and they read it together on the couch while I made dinner. Watching them, I realized that healing doesn't mean forgetting or even forgiving completely. It means choosing to move forward anyway, to build something new from the broken pieces. My mother and I will never have the relationship I wanted as a child, but we have something honest now, and maybe that's better. She stayed for dinner, and we talked about normal things, like Emma's school play and my new job and her garden in Portland. As she was leaving, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to say that, but I am. You're the strongest person I know." I hugged her back, and for the first time in my life, I believed her. Not because I needed her approval, but because I knew it was true. I had survived my parents, poverty, grief, and a custody battle with a billionaire. I'd taken them down with nothing but courage and a well-timed bluff. I'd protected my daughter and built a life worth living. That's not just strength, that's victory. Emma calls me from her room, something about homework and fractions, and I tell my mother goodnight. I help Emma with her math, read her 2 chapters of her current favorite book, and tuck her in with kisses and promises of pancakes tomorrow. She falls asleep holding the stuffed otter Jake won her at a street fair months before he died, and I watch her breathe in the soft light from her nightstand. This is everything. This quiet moment, this safe child, this life we've built from nothing. My parents thought they could buy Emma with money and threats and legal maneuvers. They thought I'd break under pressure because I always had before. But they forgot that becoming a mother changes you in ways that can't be undone. It gives you a strength you didn't know existed, a willingness to fight battles you never thought you'd face. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires too much energy, and I need all of mine for Emma. But I don't forgive them either. Some things are unforgivable, and abandoning your daughter and granddaughter in a blizzard to prove a point is one of them. What I have instead is indifference, and that's the best revenge of all. They're just people now, flawed and broken and facing consequences, and I'm free. Free to be the mother Emma deserves, free to build a future that has nothing to do with the Whitmore legacy, free to wake up every morning and choose kindness over cruelty, love over control, truth over manipulation. The moral of this story isn't complicated. It's not about revenge or justice or even standing up to bullies, though it's all those things too. It's about understanding that the people who hurt you often do it because they're afraid of losing control, afraid of being exposed, afraid of facing who they really are. And when you stop being afraid of them, when you see them clearly for the small, damaged people they are, they lose all their power over you. My father built an empire on fear, and it collapsed the moment someone refused to be afraid anymore. That someone was my mother, and then it was me, and now it's Emma, growing up in a world where she'll never have to be afraid of her own family. Tonight, I'll sleep in my small apartment with my beautiful daughter safe in the next room, and I'll be happier than I ever was in a mansion.
Because happiness isn't about money or status or winning some competition your parents invented. It's about peace. It's about knowing that the people you love are safe and the person you see in the mirror is someone you're proud to be. My parents never understood that. They probably never will. But I do, and I'm teaching Emma, and maybe that's how you break cycles. One generation, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. We're going to be just fine, better than fine. We're going to be happy and free and exactly who we were meant to be, and that's the best ending I could ask for.